have a few conferences, and one of our flagship conferences, one of our biggest conferences, what we call the Supernatural Shift Conference, and we had that in April. And it's a phenomenal conference, and it is about the supernatural. But I thought that, as we shift the supernatural, it's important to shape the natural world. There's no point moving demons without moving legislation. Does that make sense? And without making an impact. This conference was started in me a number of years ago when I was invited to speak at quite a significant conference in Nigeria. Strangely, in a city called Ilorin. Who's heard of Ilorin? It's not near Lincolnshire. Yeah. But it was quite a significant conference. I probably there were about 3,000 to 5,000 odd people. Okay. And I was one of the keynote speakers. But something really interesting happened. While I was sitting in the nice hotel room that, I was put in, just in between my sessions, as I turned on the TV, I hardly ever turn on the TVs in the hotel, in hotel rooms. But when I turned on the TV, what do they call those things again? So here it's Sky Digital. In Africa, it's DSTV. A number of channels came up. MTV, and another channel called Channel O. And you know what? I just sat there like, what do they call those things now? I was stuck there. And I almost missed the next session at the main conference. Why? Because I was startled. I was like, wow, this is crazy. And I thought to myself, this in comparison with that conference, the conference is boring. And I thought to myself, with the dances, and in fact, I started, practicing a few things, and I was loving the music, and I thought to myself, I wish the church was like this. I thought to myself, these guys are the ones discipling the nations. And I said to myself, so if, let's say we had 5,000 people at that conference, I wonder how many people the MTV programs was reaching. I know that in Africa, there are about 900 million or so odd people. This is about 20 years ago I'm talking about. And they say that presently 650 million of those are under 17. So when MTV decided to move to Africa, the CEO of MTV in the US said, I don't think we have a market. But when they got there, they found out they had a big market. Now, the point is this. What I'm trying to say is this. I then realized that these guys are grooming a whole generation. And they are the ones actually teaching. Now, many of you perhaps maybe don't have kids yet, but you will have. So start thinking about it. Okay? But I can tell you that those of us that were at that conference, most of us, our children were probably watching those channels more than they were at church. And I thought to myself, what's the point of going to teach at a conference for 2 hours when for the rest of the week they're being discipled by Channel O and Davido? And that was what stirred in me, the fact that, listen to this, we as Christians need to do more and be more and move beyond the four walls of the church and reach outside the four walls of the church and begin to push back the frontiers of the kingdom. Now, we need to push back the boundaries. And listen to this, if we don't start influencing, you know what? Some other people will take over our children. Do you know that every movie opens doors to an agenda? Let me explain what I mean. Sadly, the church has been called to be the lampstand, but we actually act more like lampshades. Why? Because it's sad to say, and I've done this for many years, we keep people in church instead of teaching people how to go out there and influence. Okay, don't tell that to your pastor when you get. but I think it was at the Supernatural Shift Conference, and I believe it was Stephanie Ike. Who remembers Stephanie Ike? Yes, she brought her baby. That baby is just over a year old or so. And when I got into the green room, who knows Apostle Arome? Okay, they were all in the room, and I looked at the TV screen. There was a TV screen, and there was a cartoon show on. And I came in and I said, Apostle Arome, you are not watching cartoon. It sounded funny, but the reason why they put on the cartoon is because of the baby. And I asked what kind of cartoon it was. Christian cartoon. And they were very intentional about the choice of the cartoon because they said, apparently that I don't know, there's a cartoon character called Coco or something like that. Is it Coco? Yes. And Coco Bear apparently, I don't know the exact story, but they've introduced some interesting genders. Now, how many of you know that 2-year-olds watching that, by the time they grow up, that becomes their norm? And how many of you know that did not happen by chance? It was intentional, it was strategic, and it was to sow a seed, as it were, so that future generations start thinking in a certain way. You are a product of the movies and things that you've watched over the years. You don't know it. Now, listen to this. So, many of you are aware that, I'm producing a movie. Thank you. Okay. You just pretended like you only just found out. But yeah. But in my trying to produce this movie, I found out a number of things. And one of my intentions was to eventually, either sell it or put it on Netflix or Amazon. So my intention is not really commercial, but it'd be nice to make a little something, at least not go broke by, while making the movie. And I was told, yes, that if I want to sell it to one of these platforms, if they're going to buy it, that the likelihood is that they will tell me to inject a few characters. And I don't need to elaborate upon that. And so what they're saying essentially is that if we're going to give you money, then you need to put this kind of thing. And I thought to myself, well, you know what? That means I'm going to make my movie all by myself with the help of some people. Who's going to help me out? But the point is that every movie you watch has an agenda. And so you're sitting there down, I was going to say, with your popcorn watching your Netflix. Most of you don't, but I do watch Netflix with popcorn. But you're sitting there watching the movie, but not knowing that there is an intentionality behind it. Okay? And who remembers Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ? Yeah, that had a clear agenda. And the agenda was fulfilled. But you know what? The Hollywood backers refused to put their money behind it. He had to go to the church to raise the money. But the point is this, anybody watching that movie will think about Christ and at least what he did for us. And this is why God wants to give you influence. But the influence you have has to be done with excellence. Because boring is boring. I made up, when I say boring is boring, I made up my mind. Why is it that kids sit down and watch MTV? Because it is done excellently. Why do they sit down and watch, but it's sad to say, many of the Christian movies we watch today, how many of you, what's it like? Be honest. Yeah. So I refuse to make a boring movie. But I hear not boring costs a lot of money.